Folks, you know what that music means. It's another exciting edition of Citizen Watch here on KYOS AM 1480, the power of local radio, the voice of the valley. You know, we're broadcasting from the Three Big Sticks out there by the lake. Not going to be there very long. I don't know if people know, but we're moving our transmitter. Not going to be out there on Lake Road, Old Lake Road anymore. Been there since 1946, I believe. The station's been in business since 36, or in existence. And we're going to have to move our transmitter to Coffee Road over here by the new Campus Parkway Exchange. And hopefully we'll have a little bit better signal for our friends out there in Mariposa County and outlying areas of Merced County that currently at night it's a little thin sometimes getting that signal. We get some comments from our listeners in Mariposa that I guess they turn it on for their animals. They like listening to KYOS. Calms them down. This lady has goats out there. It's kind of interesting. But anyway, folks, we appreciate you tuning in to Citizen Watch on this fine Saturday morning. It's heating up again. Here it is, October, and I could have sworn we were going to be back to the cooler fall weather, but one more little heat wave, and I think then it's going to go back to bearable weather here. So hopefully we'll have some cool weather later next week, and next weekend we can come to you and say it's a cool weekend. But anyway, as you know, it's election time, and some of the programming we're going to have here on KYOS centers around the election. Some of the guests we're going to have in the following weeks will be Stan Thurston, the mayor of Merced, City of Merced mayor. He's going to come in and talk about some of the things that are on the horizon with jobs, trying to get more business into town. Of course, we have the redistricting issue, which is going to be quite controversial, this Measure T. This has to do with breaking the city into districts. Going to be 6 districts with one council member from each district. The mayor will be elected at large from the 6 districts, which will be kind of interesting. But that's going to be on the ballot November election, and whether or not the citizens of Merced choose to go with districts or not will be interesting. If we don't choose to go with district election, the chances are that we'll be sued in a court of law and will be forced to go to district elections. So this just kind of precludes or short-circuits the process where hopefully we move in that direction to avoid any sort of lawsuits. But the mayor will be coming in and talking about that. And then we're also going to have Mel Levy, who was a candidate for the congressional district going up against Jim Costa. He was not successful in the primary against Johnny Teixeira and some of the other participants, but he's going to be coming in and talking about some of the observations he's seen in Merced County, since he's been back from serving our country over there in Iraq. He has some interesting insights. I think people will want to tune in and listen to that show. I also am going to have the head of the Democratic Party here in Merced County come in and talk about the election, as well as the head of the Merced Republican Party. So we're going to try to have both sides of that issue so that people can come in and talk about, those folks can come in and talk about the issues that will be facing us. There's some propositions on the ballot that are very important. We're talking about the water bond, whether or not we're going to spend billions to save our water issue. We have a casino issue on the ballot, a proposition. I believe there's an insurance proposition on the ballot. So there's a lot of really important issues that affect your pocketbook. And hopefully people will tune into those shows and be enthralled with our programming. One thing that's going to happen this coming week, I believe, is the absentee ballots are going to be coming out in the mail. This was another reason that the mayor was concerned, and some of the council members, about getting educational material out on this Measure T, the redistricting proposal, prior to the absentee ballots coming out, because as we know, a lot of the local elections are determined by the absentee ballots. They're a very good indicator of how the election is going to go. On election night, the absentee ballots are one of the first results you get at 9 o'clock when the polls close. And I would encourage people that are absentee voters to fill out your absentee ballot as soon as you can. Don't wait unless you're undecided and you need to have more information about the voters. But I would encourage you to fill out those ballots as soon as you can, sign them, stamp them. They need to be received at the election offices down there in the basement of the county building on election date or before. They cannot be postmarked after the election date or before the election date if they don't reach it. So if you mail it, make sure that you leave yourself enough time that it gets to the election office to be counted. It's really sad to see the number of ballots every year, every election, that aren't counted because they arrived too late, or they were incomplete, or they weren't signed, or there was some problem with them. So I would encourage you that vote by mail or absentee, if you're in the service or out of town, to get those ballots in quickly. I think it's really important that your voice be heard. And of course, we encourage everybody to show up to the polls on election day. Let me look at the calendar. I think that's going to be November 4th, which is a Tuesday, the first Tuesday in November. So again, if you're not going to vote absentee, please show up. One of the things that was interesting in the news with all the problems we have here in California, the thing that the governor seemed to focus on this week was plastic bags. Actually, I guess it was last weekend that he signed the legislation. We have a severe drought, worst water shortage we've had in a century. Doesn't look like it's going to be any better, but we have bag legislation. So I find this very disheartening that we're looking after plastic bags more so than water. I understand this is controversial and people think that it's really going to make the difference in our pollution, but I don't think so. I think that when you're still allowing to have bags for fish and produce and vegetables and meat, it kind of takes away the idea. I don't know if the old days of the butcher wrapping things in paper and you carrying your groceries home in paper bags. Paper bags now are going to cost us 10 cents a piece if we want paper. So when they ask you paper or plastic, there's going to be no choice on plastic, and paper is going to cost you. Obviously, they want people to bring reusable, recyclable bags in, which is a great idea, but it's not necessarily practical. For some business owners, these small bodegas where you go in and buy a soda, a bag of chips, something like that, you really don't carry a bag with you when you go in there. You're getting gas, you walk in, you get a pack of gum, some chips, a soda. I guess you now have to carry it all out in your hand. Understandably, there's some pushback against this legislation. There's been the threat of putting it on the ballot and letting the voters decide. But I think that the handwriting's on the wall. And once again, California is going to lead the nation in legislation to try to save us from ourselves. I think that, again, the impact of this isn't fully thought out. It's a feel-good legislation, if anything, and I don't see where it really benefits the community. But I've been wrong before, as many people can tell you, so hopefully this will go. One of the things that we voted on years ago was to protect chickens. The cage sizes were thought to be too small, and they had a ballot proposition to increase the size of the chicken cages so they weren't cramped and they could stand up. And I was disappointed to see that a couple of juveniles and an adult went into the Foster Farms facility here locally and clubbed to death over almost 1,000 young chickens. Cruelty to animals. Very, very disappointing that some people just don't get it. And I don't know why people are inclined to do this or go out and do this kind of behavior, but very, very disappointing. Obviously, they didn't hear that we are now kind to chickens in California. So I hope that those folks are held accountable for their actions. Cost Foster Farms, I think it was $10,000, $15,000 in loss of the birds. So definitely looking at felony vandalism there, or cruelty to animals, many different charges. So again, I hope that those folks pay for their crimes. Something else that was in the news this week, unfortunately, we had another murder here on the streets of Merced. The blood flows in the gutter in the streets of Merced over there on the south side. They're still waiting for their park, their soccer fields, but meanwhile the murders continue. A young man on a bicycle on 11th Street over off of M Street, right over there by the Catholic Church, was gunned down, 27 years old. At the time I record this, I don't know if it was gang related, but obviously when a young man on that side of town is cut down, 9 times out of 10 it is gang related. I know that last year we had record number of homicides in Merced, and I hope that we're not on a record-breaking year. Here it is, just the first week of October, and we've had another murder. Very, very sad. There's no reason for it. I'm very disappointed that these things are happening. I only hope that Operation Ceasefire and some of these other programs, Mojo, we've talked on these airways many, many times about the programs we have to try to divert youth, to try to get people on the right path. And I know that we can't eliminate every murder, but hopefully the efforts of these folks are helping, and we're not seeing as many as we would have seen had we not had these programs. I think the efforts of the folks that are out there trying to keep the peace, whether it be leaving your porch light on, whether it be trying to get kids into the Boys and Girls Club, into other activities. We have the Youth Council now to hopefully bring the ideas of our youth. Obviously 27, he was a little older than a youth, but I just like to think that we're on the downward declining numbers, violent crime here in Merced. But again, our thoughts go out to the family of the victim in this latest homicide, and hopefully the killer or killers or perpetrators of this crime will be found. Another thing that was in the news that I found interesting was the abuse of the ADA, or the Disabilities Act. This is something, again, unique to California. Is the Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA requirements that you have handicap ramps, striping, handicap parking places, your plumbing, counter heights. There's just a myriad of rules and regulations that apply to handicapped folks and they're interacting in commercial businesses. We've read lately in the news where there's individuals that go out and take advantage of these good intentions of these laws to try to help the folks that are truly handicapped in our community. And some folks feel that the only way to bring about change or more change is through litigation. And we've seen where some businesses have been negatively impacted by this litigation, frivolous litigation in some people's minds. And it was good to see that Adam Gray, our state assemblyman, was proposing to introduce legislation up in Sacramento to at least give business owners another avenue besides having to go to court and defend themselves, possibly a grace period once these violations are brought up, maybe some sort of mediation with the local authorities. But I think this is something that we need to talk about and decide how we're going to proceed, because these businesses, small businesses, are our backbone, folks. And if we don't have small businesses in our community and they feel threatened by litigation, well, they're not going to open up. And again, it's a fine line between compliance and taking advantage of the law. So some of these individuals that are serial litigants, I think, need to be looked at what their true motives are. Is it money, or is it truly trying to promote the American with Disability Act and trying to provide access for all? I'd love to hear from folks that feel that it's anything but a grab for legal fees. We're getting to the end of our first segment. Going to have to take a commercial break here on KYOS 1480 AM, the voice of the Valley, the power of local radio. We appreciate you being here on this Saturday morning, albeit a warm one. And we'll be right back after these messages. Folks, welcome back to the second segment of Citizen Watch here on KYOS AM 1480, the voice of the Valley, the power of local radio. broadcasting here from Studio C, the palatial KYOS facilities in downtown Merced at 1020 West Main Street, on the corner of Q and Main, right next to the new China Cafe. Great place for lunch. Always like going over there and having the garlic chicken. But again, if anybody has any comment about Citizen Watch, our show, would encourage you to call our tip line at 209-406-8728. You can write us a letter at 1020 West Main Street, Merced, California, 95340. Or you can always email us at psa@radiomerced.com. You can just send us a note. You don't have to put your name. If you want us to contact you, let us know your number or your email address, and we'll write back to you. We do appreciate all the tips that the folks give us. One thing that I found interesting in the news this week was the resignation of one of the Merced Union High School District board members. Evidently, he was going to take more time to spend with his family. He was a sheriff's officer. We're talking about William Snyder III, who resigned last week. I think he had 2 years left on his commitment with the school board. And really not sure of the total reasons other than what was said in the paper in regards to him wanting to spend more time with his family. I know that there's been some controversial issues over there with the Merced Union High School District. As we've reported on these very airwaves on this very show, they had a diploma mill issue over there with one of their IT personnel. And what this is, a diploma mill, is where you basically pay for a college degree without going to school. This particular university that this individual used was called Alameda University, not Alameda, but Alameda. They're a well-known diploma mill. And this issue was brought up to the school board going on, I want to say, 18 months now. It's been something that's festering over there for a while. There's been no discipline that I know of that's been publicly taken or behind closed doors. Nothing's come out in the school board meetings. They're held once a month, various locations. And so it's interesting why one of the school board members resigned. It makes you wonder if he was disappointed in some of the actions of administration in not dealing with some of these issues that have been brought up. It was said in the paper that Mr. Snyder was the type of person to not mince words. He was well respected and liked, and though he didn't always go along with the majority, his opinion was, again, valued. So we hope that the school board, the remaining members left, and of course the superintendent, Mr. Scambray, will take action on this diploma mill issue, because the thing that concerned me about it is you're paid based on your experience, based on your knowledge. I can tell you here at the station, they pay me based on my experience, and it's not much because I don't have much experience. But as you gain more experience and you become more valuable to your employer, you should obviously go up in pay. The thing that was disappointing here was the individual got a better position based on a degree that wasn't from an accredited institution, an accredited learning institution such as Merced College or the University of California or any one of the many, many accredited institutions that are out there. But this individual chose to pay a flat fee of $500-$600, doesn't really matter what it was, dollars, to get a degree that was based on quote-unquote life experience. Now, again, that may not be too bad, but the life experience is what you tell them. They don't vet it. They don't check it out to see if you really did these things. They're just more interested in the check cashed. So I think to get a promotion or a raise based on a degree that's not accepted anywhere else except the Merced Union High School District is disingenuous to those folks that do go to an accredited learning institution, park their car in the far reaches of the parking lot, walk to class every day during the school year, the semester, the units they're taking, whatever they do, and then graduate successfully based on tests. those are the folks that were slighted by this individual taking the shortcut or the easy way. And it's very disappointing that the school district doesn't stand up for those individuals and stand against people that would try to use these fake degrees. I think this really is a lack of public trust, because we just passed a school bond for the Merced Elementary School District, and I know the high school district has several bonds out there that we're paying on. And folks, this money doesn't grow on trees. It comes from your wallets. It's from taxes, from assessments, from your property taxes. And if we're paying people more than they deserve because they don't have the qualifications that were stated in a job solicitation, well, I think that's a serious problem, and it shows a flaw in the management of the Merced Union High School District and its superintendent, V. Scott Scambray, who we've been critical of for issues related to the new Al Capitan High School and this diploma issue. So hopefully Mr. Snyder's resignation was just that, something that had to do with his family and not the disgust that we feel towards the Merced Union High School District and their handling of this diploma mill issue. So maybe in the November meeting or the October meeting of the Merced Union High School Board of Trustees, this issue will finally be resolved. It's something I'd like to see resolved, and I just don't know why it's taken so long to get this issue in front of the public or to tell the public what they're doing. I know there was an article in the paper several months ago now, time kind of slips away from me, where Larry Morris, our district attorney, was going to take a second look at this diploma mill issue, because again, there was a sheriff's report, which we reported on, that was filed on this case and that was forwarded to the district attorney's office for a review to see if there was any crime that was committed where prosecution would be necessary. And I know the Merced Sun-Star did an article again a few months ago where D.A. Morris was going to look at that. And as far as I know, we haven't heard back on what the outcome of that review was. So again, I know the wheels of government and different departments move incredibly slowly, and when they do move, something does happen. But I think this issue has gone on a long time, and we owe it to our kids. If we have somebody over there in the IT department that's not qualified or that got in on qualifications that are a little sketchy, I think we owe it to our kids to have the best qualified people in there. So hopefully this issue will get resolved and we can put it to bed and know where it stands. I don't know, maybe the individual is trying to get a real degree in the meantime, but we'll see what happens. You know, in the Atwater City Council race, they had a debate, the League of Women Voters, the other night over at the Merced City Council chambers. I hear it was well attended. I understand it's on YouTube if you want to watch it. And they had not only the mayoral candidates, Jim Price and Joan Fall, but they also had the city council candidates for Atwater, which I believe there are 4 or 5 that are running. I found one comment made by a man named James Vineyard. He's a council candidate. He evidently worked for CAL FIRE, Department of Forestry, and one of his answers was about accountability. He says you need accountability, but you shouldn't point fingers at others. Well, I really don't see how you can have one without the other. I think if you demand accountability, if somebody doesn't do the job, you're going to need to point fingers. And obviously there's been some issues over there at Atwater in the past that begs the question, who is accountable? So I don't really understand Mr. Vineyard's answer to that, but again, being a public servant for many years, maybe he doesn't believe in calling people out that don't do their jobs. I think in the private sector, that's something that's very common. If you don't do your job, and obviously over there in Atwater, there's been some concern, I think, with the lack of fiscal oversight, how some of these enterprise funds got so out of whack. They didn't raise water or sewage rates for decades over there. Business license fees weren't collected. They went retroactively back and tried to collect some fees. I know that the sewer, water, garbage, one of them is going up over 100%. I think the others are going up incrementally pretty steep. So the residents over there in Atwater, I think, are really paying attention to this election. They have a lot of choices. They can go with the status quo, or they can move on with some new vision. So I think that was a good debate, and I would encourage people to go back and look at that League of Women Voters debate. The other debate, folks that have gotten into the debate scene, is the Board of Realtors, the Merced County Realtors Association. They hold a good series of debates. They're not open to the public. They're open to their membership at their facilities down there on Main Street, across from Renero's Eatery. And I know that they had a sheriff's debate, which was pretty good. They had Vern Warnke and Pat Lunny in there talking about their views. And, of course, that's another interesting race here in Merced County. Two very divergent opinions. You have Vern Warnke from the field, seems to identify with the troops, very folksy. And then you have Pat Lunny, who's an administrator most of his life, former police chief here in Merced County, held some state positions, and he definitely is going on his administrative strength and fiscal leadership overseeing large budgets. I know one of the concerns that's been talked about is these tent cities, or putting our prisoners in tents. I know with AB 109, which I have said is a failure, realignment, prison realignment, where we're taking some of our less serious felons and keeping them here in our community. Well, we're running out of room at the inn, and there's no room to house these felons. And so one of the ideas of Vern's is Mr. Warnke is, candidate Warnke, is tent cities, similar to what Joe Arpaio is doing in Arizona, or has done in Arizona. And Vern Warnke said that Joe Arpaio was one of his heroes. The problem with Arizona and California is they're vastly different regulations. This Americans with Disability Act, which we have and Arizona doesn't have to deal with, makes it virtually impossible to house prisoners in tents. I think it was said by somebody at the CDC that, oh, you can put tents, but you just can't put prisoners in them. So while it may sound good to do this and placate some of the fears of those that in the community of these felons running free and no room for them at Sandy Mush, it really doesn't look as if that's a viable concern. Now, I know Vern has said he's going to explore this legally to see if it possibly can be done, but it seems like the handwriting's on the wall on that one. Conversely, I don't know where Pat would get the money, candidate Lunny, would get the money to house more prisoners. We have a serious budget shortfalls. Corrections are stretched to the max now. I don't know if we can hire more people. We certainly didn't get the bond monies to build another mush or a new jail, which is sorely needed. You know, we have beds out there right now that aren't filled because we don't have the correction officers to fill them, or not fill the beds, but to oversee the supervision if those beds were filled. It's one thing to build more beds, but the cost is in the operation. And the construction cost is really infinitesimal when you start getting into the cost of staffing those facilities day after day, month after month, year after year. So the sheriff's race is going to have some really tough, whoever gets this position is going to have some really tough issues to deal with, and they're not easy. They're not as easy as building tents, and money doesn't grow on trees. So again, I think that's a closely watched race, and the League of Women Voters and the Realtors, Board of Realtors had some very good debates on that. Coming to the end of our second segment on Citizen Watch on this Saturday morning on KYOS AM 1480. Just one more segment to go. Encourage folks to stick with us. We'll be right back. Folks, welcome back to the third and final segment on Citizen Watch here on this beautiful Saturday morning, the first Saturday in October 4th. Well into fall, but the weather sure doesn't feel like it. It's really warm. The last heat wave, hopefully, we'll have for a while, and we could sure use some rain. We had a little rain up in the hills, made it down here to the valley last Saturday, about a quarter inch up in Mariposa. I'll tell you, it was welcome, barely wet the ground though, and 2 days later you couldn't even tell. So we really need to get some water here in our valley, in our reservoirs. You can't believe how bad Lake McClure, all of the reservoirs look here in the state. National Weather Service has predicted a drier than usual winter. I think only 9 inches are predicted the last report I heard. Hopefully that's changed. I tell you, we just, it's groundwater regulation being proposed by Governor Brown. Every well in the state, private, public, industrial, doesn't matter. It's going to come under regulation by Governor Brown, by the state of California, unless the local municipalities, the local entities can get it together and come up with some meaningful legislation. So hopefully that will happen. But the weather, we just can't get enough rain. Hopefully it's a slow, gentle rain for weeks and weeks. And the irrigation season is over, as we mentioned last week. No more water for the farmers until next year. And I tell you, if we can't fill those reservoirs up, we're really going to be in bad shape. You know, I was reading the Merced County Times. They had a follow-up article to the Parsons Avenue debacle. Those folks over on Parsons Avenue, as you may remember, wanted to have a meeting with the city of Merced to try to put to bed the Parsons Avenue issue. Do we proceed? Do we go? Do we keep putting more money towards it? The bridge over Bear Creek, the under or overpass at the Santa Fe tracks, the Burlington Northern Santa Fe tracks. Who's going to pay for that? When's the money going to come? Acquiring properties along the right-of-way, vacant properties, existing homes, to make a wide enough thoroughfare that it's feasible. Well, these folks the folks that live over there on Parsons Avenue feel that it should be taken out of the general plan as a minor arterial, major arterial, whatever you want to call it, where the money doesn't flow to it anymore. City staff doesn't spend any more time than they have to on it. And the meeting was fruitless. Nothing happened. It was 2-3-3 votes. The final vote to take the Parsons project out of the general plan was a 4-2 vote. Mayor Thurston and Council Member Blake voted to take it out of the plan. And Council members Pedroso, Murphy, Lohr, and Dossetti voted to keep it in the general plan, much to the dismay of some of the local residents. The Merced County Times correctly reported that third and final vote, which really is what the residents wanted. They wanted it taken out of the general plan, never to be seen again. Put a stake in its heart. You know, this thing does not need to see the light of day, in their opinion. I think by the vote, the final vote, only the mayor and Councilman Blake agreed with them. By leaving it in the general plan, the city is basically saying, the council members that voted not to take it out are basically saying that Parsons Avenue, at some day, is a good idea. As I said, we're going to have some guests in here to talk about that. Mayor Thurston, Mel Levy, some of our other folks that we have scheduled in the month. And hopefully we can get their opinion on it. Because, you know, I don't really have much of an opinion as far as the folks on Parsons. I live on McKee, and I see the traffic now, and I can empathize with them. And I know that there's 2 schools on that street, Parsons, and it just doesn't work well with all that traffic going by the school. But we've gone down this road since, I think, 1950. This has been in the general plan. Millions of dollars have been committed to it. And what do we do now? I found it interesting that Council Member Dossetti had more questions now than he did before. I know he's been in town for many years, former police chief running for District 3 supervisor. And evidently there's still questions even in his mind as to what to do on this project. So hopefully those questions can be answered in his mind and the other city council members' mind. And I hate to say it, but I think the folks on Parsons have been given a direction at that council meeting. They didn't like it. And I don't know what they're going to do from now on, but it'll be interesting to see. So hopefully we'll have some more comment on that. Very good editorial this week in the Merced County Times from Mel Levy about a failing community and what we need to do for our community. Another interesting op-ed piece was by John Derby about John Pedroso. Of course, John Pedroso used to be heard on these airwaves, and unfortunately, we've had some programming changes here at KYOS where he's not on anymore, but I know that he was a good guest and would talk about the issues facing the county and some of his own issues when they came up. The purpose of John Derby's article was Stop Spanking John Pedroso. He feels that John Pedroso, Supervisor Pedroso, District 1 Supervisor Pedroso, is being picked upon by the Merced Sun-Star and some of the media outlets. I don't know if we're considered a media outlet, but I know that we've chimed in on Mr. Pedroso's actions, if you will, as a supervisor. And one of them was his hiring of a personal assistant that didn't have a license, or at some point didn't have a license, and he was unaware of that. When he was made aware of that, he fired the assistant. He has since hired a new assistant. The new assistant has been vetted. They do have a driver's license. They are able to drive county vehicles without exposing us to a libelous situation. And John Derby took exception to the Sun-Star pointing out Mr. Pedroso's previous issues with his previous assistant when they reported on the new assistant. And I appreciate Mr. Derby's paper and his opinion, and I think that he admits they've been a supporter of John Pedroso in the past when he's ran for office. And he says in his editorial he may have made a mistake in allowing his first assistant to drive on a suspended license. This would imply that he knew her license was suspended. And he asked the question, how many of us who run businesses know what the status of our employees' license is? Well, Mr. Derby, you answer your question in the next paragraph, but it's pretty obvious. If you're an employer, you have a great liability when you put people in the company ride, whether you're the county, the city of Merced, the state of California, PG&E, public or private. When you turn the keys over to somebody, if they're not licensed and they get in an accident and hurt or kill or maim or injure somebody or even personal property, we're really on the hook for it. So we have a due diligence, whether you be a private employer or the county of Merced, to check that the people that drive these vehicles are licensed and can be insured, so that if we do have an issue, we're not on the hook. He says in his next paragraph, we had an employee who was 26 years old and he was still driving on a learner's permit. We only found out about it when we tried to get him insured to drive a company vehicle. Now the county policy is to check such things, and it is a good policy. One would think the matter would be over, but no. The top headline story repeated the entire episode of the first employee who had done wrong. Well, there's a reason why it's repeated, because it was so egregious the first time. And maybe Supervisor Pedroso would quit getting quote-unquote spanked, in Mr. Derby's vernacular, if he'd quit making mistakes. So I think that we need to highlight why he had to hire a new assistant, because the old one, well, he had to let go. So I understand that Mr. Derby may find it uncomfortable when somebody that he has supported is called out on the carpet, but there's a reason why. And the reason is that it was egregious and it shouldn't have happened. There should have been policies in place at the county that should have prevented this, just like there were policies in place at the Merced County Times and their insurer that prevented them from doing the same thing. So I can understand where Mr. Derby is disappointed at the Sun-Star's reporting, but quite frankly, the only way that change happens in this county seems to be when the light is shone or shine on these issues. And if we don't talk about them, how are they ever going to change? We obviously can't let these people govern or make their own rules because they don't follow them. There's still no code of ethics at the Board of Supervisors. They still don't follow certain guidelines that other supervisors in other counties follow. And I don't know why there's a reluctance to do this. I don't know why there's a reluctance to check employees. The thing that made Miss Valenzuela Porras, who was Mr. Pedroso's assistant previously, is that she reported to no one except Mr. Pedroso. He hired her. And when he hired her, he incurred a liability of her driving. And nobody could check it out. It was up to him to check it out. She didn't go through HR. She wasn't supervised by anybody but Supervisor Pedroso, just the same as the other supervisors that have assistants. Deidre Kelsey, her assistant, only reports to Supervisor Kelsey. Lynn Davis, who is leaving at the end of this year, he hired a supervisor, I don't know, to help pack his bags or do something, but she only reports to Lynn Davis. So I think the reason that this gets the press it gets, Mr. Derby, is because of the nature of what went on and the lack of accountability. And these are the kind of things that we're trying to prevent in the future so that we don't have an incident. We don't have a call after hours to the chief of police to ask what's going on. We never get to that point. So, again, I really like the Merced County Times. I love their reporting, and I know sometimes it's uncomfortable to see your friends called out, but I think in this case, the Merced Sun-Star was just reporting on something that was in the news. We were told that Mr. Pedroso wasn't thinking about hiring a new assistant, but I understand that mail piles up, and when you don't know Spanish and the majority of your district is Hispanic, you need to have somebody to interpret so you know what your constituency is talking about. So I don't blame Mr. Pedroso for hiring a new assistant, and I'm glad that he vetted this one and make sure that she can drive the company ride, the county vehicles, and not exposing the citizens and the taxpayers of this county more pointedly to any kind of liability, more so than we have already. Well, folks, we're getting to the end of Citizen Watch on this first Saturday in October. I appreciate you putting up with me, and it's kind of hard to do this show by myself sometimes. I really appreciate all of the listeners out there. I, again, would encourage you to listen to us on YouTube. You can go to YouTube, put KYOS space 1480 in the search bar, listen to all of our old shows. You can write us at 1020 West Main Street, Merced, California, 95340. For all of our listeners out there at USP Atwater, the penitentiary out there at the old base, well, we appreciate all of our listeners. We used to have a couple that wrote letters periodically, and we would encourage you to continue that. If you want to call into our tip line, the number is 406-8728. That's a 209 area code. Of course, you can always send us an email at psa@radiomerced.com. That music means that it's time to go for this week. Like I say, we're going to have some special guests coming in over the next few weeks. I'll be interviewing Mayor Thurston, City of Merced, Mel Levy, former candidate for the congressional seat, a citizen about Merced, back from serving his country very proudly, and we're very proud of what Mel did. We'll also have the Democratic and the Republican parties in to talk about the election, which is coming up November 4th. So once again, folks, thanks for joining Citizen Watch on this Saturday morning. Stay tuned for Tea Party Straight Talk. And we're going to have a special election edition with Jim Price on at 9 o'clock. And then, of course, Real Living Today with Dr. Bob. So again, thank you for listening to KYOS AM 1480, the voice of the valley, the power of local radio. Good night.